everybody! Today's video is why I would never, ever work in Eikaiwa ever again. However, overall it was a really positive experience, not gonna lie. I met some of the nicest people I've ever met in my entire life. Students were great. Yeah, overall great experience, but nah. But it's one that's also, you get burnt out very easily. It's very hard mentally. Like, I have a lot of respect for people who are Eikaiwa teachers for like 5-6 years, because that's hard. So the first time I started working in an Eikaiwa, I did actually end up working there for a year, and it was one of the really big ones. I thought it was hilarious because I started working there and they just told me to turn up to work one day. Like, I had the interview, they decided I would be a good fit for that company. I turned up, they gave me the schedule for the day, and it was a whole bunch of different classes. It was like salarymen, a group of women, a group of children, really small kids, but they didn't really tell me what to do. And then I looked at the thing and it had like shorthand like acronyms for different textbooks, and I asked the woman at the counter who was supposed to be helping me, I was like, am I supposed to be using some kind of textbook? And she was like, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you, the textbooks are all in that cupboard. And I went in the cupboard and there was tons of textbooks, but like I had to match it to the code. I'd never seen the textbooks before, I'd never used the textbooks before. On my first day, I'm like, why didn't they show me the textbooks? Like, if I looked through them before, it would, the whole experience would have been so much easier. But when in Rome, I took my textbooks and I went into the room and I just started teaching. I learned very quickly that working in Eikaiwa is just blagging. It's just like winging it. It's just pretending to know what you're supposed to know, because no one I've spoken to who's worked in Eikaiwa has got really any kind of training. So you really just have to pretend to know what you're doing. My first day, it was really tough. It was like a full like 9 to 5, I think, of just class. You have a 5-minute break between classes. You will not get that break because you're assigned to like a little room and you have to stay there the whole day, and your students will come to you. And obviously people like to arrive a little bit earlier, so everyone tries to go in the class before their time. So you end up just losing that 5-minute break. So you'll be teaching for like 4 or 5 hours really without a break, and you'll have like little kid, old man, old woman, young man, young women. The thing that got me is I love variety, but it was just too varied, and you had to adjust yourself so much between each class. And for me, that was the hardest part of teaching Eikaiwa for me, was the inconsistency. You'll get regular students, which is great. The only bad thing, I think, is if like you're teaching for a year and you have students that you don't particularly like. I was really lucky. I don't recall having any students that I didn't really like. The issue is that most of these people are just incredibly boring. Like, most of the men I taught, we had to do a little bit of free chat every day, and every day, every student, it was the same conversation, I swear to God. It was like, oh, did you do anything at the weekend? And they'll always say, nothing special. And then you'll press them because you've got 5 minutes to fill. Did you watch anything on TV? Oh yeah, I watched TV. Oh, was there anything on? Was there an interesting program that you watched? And they'll just say, oh, I don't really remember, like I just watched whatever was on TV. And then there'll be a lot of awkward silences, because obviously you need to understand that these people are really nervous and they're speaking in their non-native language. But also, a lot of people that attend Eikaiwa aren't necessarily doing it because they want to learn English. A lot of people are just bored and lonely. Like, a lot of students I had, they had no interest in actually using English outside of the class. They just wanted to talk to someone, which is really sad. But also, like, it's important that you're nice to them and at least you give them that time to speak, because I feel like a lot of people, particularly one man I spoke to, he was a man living with his wife, and they had been married for a really long time. He doesn't really have any friends, and him and his wife didn't have the best relationship. It was honestly very uncomfortable at times, because you'll find in Eikaiwa, people will unload a lot of their feelings onto you. I think particularly Japanese people believe that foreigners are a lot more open and easier to talk about their feelings, which can be true sometimes. So a lot of time you'll have a lot of uncomfortable situations and people will kind of use you as a therapist or just a way to unload the burden that they have on themselves. And this guy would often tell me that his wife was drinking too much and sometimes she could be abusive, and honestly it was awful and I didn't really know what to say. And this man didn't seem like he had any friends, he didn't really have anyone else to talk to, and I think he just needed to talk to someone. So yeah, honestly teaching him wasn't great, but I made sure that I was understanding and empathetic. Honestly, I probably could have complained and said I didn't want to teach him anymore because it wasn't maybe professional to be talking about that kind of thing, but this guy just seemed lonely and like he wanted to speak to someone, and you'll really encounter this a lot if you're teaching Eikaiwa. I taught one girl specifically, I think she was like 24. She was really, really nice, one of the nicest people I've ever met. She was just lovely. But the problem was that she was really boring and she didn't really have any interest outside of Eikaiwa, so it was really hard to strike up any kind of conversation with her. Like, she didn't watch TV, she didn't listen to music. So you have to be really good at conversing with people for this job. Like, a lot of people who end up moving to Japan, a lot of them are really socially awkward. Like, I know it's kind of like the elephant in the room, but a lot of people who have an affinity with Japan or move to any foreign country, they do it because they're not happy in their own country and they really struggle to make friends. And if you struggle to make friends in your own country, in your own language, then obviously you're gonna struggle with social anxiety if you're moving to a whole foreign country and you're using a whole different language. So that's the pitfall a lot of people have when they come here and they become Eikaiwa teachers, is they're just not good at talking and they're not good at conversing. And that's not a bad thing. Like, a lot of people just aren't good at it. Like, it's a skill, and I used to not be very good at it, and I had to really try, and I had to practice. So it's just a huge learning curve, and a lot of it is trial and error. A lot of it is just learning how to speak clearly, directly, and patiently. One of my best memories as an Eikaiwa teacher is one of my students was a Japanese woman. I would say she was in her 50s, and she loved just anything traditionally Japanese, and she was actually someone who teaches tea ceremony, and she was taking Eikaiwa lessons because she wanted to learn how to teach this in English, because she wanted to promote the culture to foreigners overseas. And that was really fun because I also got to learn about tea ceremony, and when you're teaching people in Eikaiwa, you'll often learn a whole bunch of stuff that you didn't know before. And then on the last day, because I think she was moving overseas to actually teach her tea ceremony, we had the class and she gave me a yukata because it was in summer, and she told me to change into it, and she gifted this to me. She let me, she actually did let me keep it, and it was something that had been in her family for a really long time, but I don't think she had a daughter or anything to gift it to, so she was really excited to gift this to me. And she put the yukata on me, and then we did a tea ceremony together. It was just such a wonderful memory, and I'm so glad that I did teach Eikaiwa because I was able to do that. I was able to meet people who wanted to share the things they're interested in with me. Before this, I never spent a lot of time with like really small children, so that was a big learning curve for me, because speaking to a child and speaking to an adult is so different, particularly in a classroom environment. But I really love teaching small children, and it's actually through Eikaiwa that I learned that I wanted to be an elementary school teacher. But a lot of the time the problem with Eikaiwa is these kids already go to school, so a lot of the time they don't want to spend Saturday or like after school in a classroom. So a lot of the problems you would have with kids is just that bored, and like rightfully so, because this is their free time and they're being forced to study. The funniest one I ever had was this really little girl. I think she must have been like 3 years old, and it was just starting to be able to even speak Japanese, and it was her first time meeting a foreigner, because for a lot of these kids, if you're their English teacher, you might be the only foreigner that they've ever met before in their whole life. And she saw me and she just started crying, and you're supposed to try to get them to come in the room, but she just would not. And in that case, sometimes the parents will physically put them in the room with you. And her parents put her in the room and just closed the door, and they locked it. And then this poor little girl was just looking at me and looking at the door, and she could see her parents through the door, and she was scratching at the door. And she was just doing this for like, the lesson's like what, 35-40 minutes, so she was just doing that the whole time, just scratching at the door like a cat trying to get out, and crying. And she was just terrified of me. I don't think she's ever just seen anyone that looked like me before, and she was just honestly terrified. I felt so bad. At first I tried to like get her to warm up to me, but then after a while I just left her alone. And then eventually she just like stopped trying to leave, and she just sat silently sobbing on the floor. And after the lesson I said to her parents, like, she's not enjoying the class. I don't know, maybe in like a couple of years you should bring her back, but it doesn't seem like she really wants to. And her parents were like, no, like, you don't understand, this is the best class she's ever had. Like, normally she's a lot more upset than this, like, she really likes you. And it made me realize how oblivious some of these parents were. Like, for example, I had one little girl, and she was great. She enjoyed English class and she had fun. She wasn't like really advanced English, but she wasn't bad, I guess. And she was in a class with like 4 other students, and she had a really good time, and she enjoyed playing with the other kids. And her mom would find me after every class and talk to me, and she would basically tell me that she thinks her kid's too smart for this class, and she wants a one-on-one lesson, or she wants her kid to be bumped up. And that's really not up to me, that's up to the school, and normally we have to give them tests to do this, and I just used to tell her to do that. But it didn't matter how many times I told her, she would come back the next lesson and she would tell me that her kid was too smart to be in this class. And like, I don't know, I felt like her kid wasn't even the strongest speaker or listener in the class anyway, so that definitely wasn't the case. And she kept telling me that when her kid got home, her kid would cry and say that she wanted to be in the upper class, which I knew wasn't true, because this kid was having so much fun just playing with her kids. And like, she wasn't even aware that she was in a classroom. She was just like, oh, I get to play with my friends again. And then eventually the mom wrote me a letter pretending to be her daughter, like, oh, look, see, my daughter wrote this letter for you, like, see how good she is at English, like, I think she should definitely be in one of the advanced classes. And you could tell the mom blatantly wrote this letter. Like, I'm this kid's teacher, like, I see her write all the time, like, this kid can barely write, and now she gives me this letter. It was just really weird. And a lot of the parents were living vicariously through their kids, and they'd always approach me after class and like ask me a lot of questions about how their kids are doing. And like, you know, like, you don't become fluent in English immediately, so often it's just like, oh yeah, they're trying their best, they're having fun, and a lot of the time it wasn't what the parents wanted to hear. When I realized I really didn't want to be in this industry is when I learned how unstable it was, because I used to work with this Scottish man. He was quite a big guy. He was really nice. I think he was about 25, but he was like a big guy. And the woman he was teaching kept complaining about him. And this is something that happens a lot in the Eikaiwa system. A lot of people join Eikaiwas because they think they're gonna get a really attractive teacher. So if they're a guy, they want an attractive young woman. If they're a woman, sometimes they want a young attractive guy. And when they don't get that, sometimes they'll just complain, and sometimes they'll make up stuff. And this woman kept complaining that this guy wasn't a good teacher, and he was a good teacher. He was just like, I think one issue was that he had like a Scottish accent, and obviously she didn't like that. But I think it was mostly the fact that she just didn't find him attractive. And so she complained, and the company forced him to do some kind of training program. He did that. He went back to her class, and she kept complaining again. And then one day I walked into the school, and he was just fired. Like, they just fired him. And it was right before his visa renewal, so he's like, oh, I gotta go back to Scotland. Customers are annoying in like every field, but it's more like a management problem. And I find in these Eikaiwas, most of the time they're managed really, really poorly, and like they'll put the customer's needs on top, obviously, but that means that they don't really help protect or listen to any of their teachers. And I've seen it a lot where people will just get fired, or like they'll get a really ridiculous complaint and they'll not even listen to the teacher side of the story. So like this is something that happens a lot, and it was awful. Like this guy was like a filigree man and he was crying, and it was just awful to see. And I realized like how easily that could happen to me. I think I was pretty lucky. Like I've had a few dodgy Eikaiwa students before. I think I mentioned it in a video I made before about the black company I worked for that was a separate Eikaiwa. But in general, I didn't have that many problem students, apart from this one day when I was covering for someone and I had to work in one of the branches of the Eikaiwa that I'd never really been to in Nakano. And I went there and it was honestly not bad. It was a good day. But then my last student was this Japanese office worker. I guess he was also like my age. So I guess at that time he was like 24, 25. He was pretty attractive and he seemed like a nice guy. And we were talking, having a normal lesson, nothing out of the ordinary. And I didn't notice him being too creepy or anything. And then last lesson of the day, so I thanked him, he left. Another annoying thing is sometimes you have to stay behind and clean, and if you're teaching kids there's always like toys everywhere, and you also have to vacuum sometimes. So I did that, and that took about like 15 minutes. Got my stuff. I always stayed around and chatted to the women at the counter. They always have like a 40-year-old Japanese woman. I always used to just stay around and chat with them because they're always a good laugh. And then so I guess like 20-25 minutes had passed since I had my last student, and I walked outside. I stepped outside the door and I bumped into someone like really, really hard. And it just, first I was just shocked. I was seeing stars, and then I looked and it was a student I just taught, and he said, "Oh, sensei, I fancy seeing you here." And I'm like, outside my workplace that you've just seen me at. Like, what do you mean fancy seeing you here? But like whatever. I was like, yeah, okay, I'm just gonna go home now, bye. And then he just started following me, and he said he was just walking. I was like, oh, I'm going home too actually. And I was like, well, you left 25 minutes ago, like why aren't you already at home? But like whatever. So I was walking and trying to get away from him, and he's keeping my pace walking. And then he said, are you going to the station? And I can't lie, can I? So I said, yeah, I'm going to the station. So we went to the station, and he said, oh, what station are you at? And he said, what line are you? And there's only like 2 lines, and he's gonna see me walking anyways, and like the line I took, people don't normally take that one. I assumed he'd be taking the other one, so I told him what line it was, and he said, oh, me too, I'll take the train with you. And I was like, Jesus Christ. And at least there's like 2 platforms. I'm like, he's probably not gonna be on the same platform as me, but I guess he was. And then we're on the train together, he's talking, I'm like awkwardly looking at my phone, and I'm mailing my ex-boyfriend already to tell him the situation. And then we get off and we leave the station, and at this time I live just outside of the station, and I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna go now, bye. And he said, oh, so you live around here? And I was like, oh god, like I didn't know what to say. So I was like, yeah, I live around here, I live like blah blah blah. And he was like, wow, that's amazing, I work in that building right there. And it was like this big glass, like I think it was Honda. And he said, oh yeah, I can probably see your apartment from my office. I thought that was really, really creepy. So I was just like, okay, well, I gotta go to the convenience now, see you later. And I just ran off. And then my ex-boyfriend came and picked me up. And I was just so thankful that I was covering for someone that day, so I never had to go back to that class, and I never saw that guy again. I did actually move a little, not too far after that, so I never ended up seeing him again, but I could just feel that this was going to become a problem. And this is something that you'll deal with. A lot of people, like, it's like a parasocial relationship. Your students will just get too invested in you, and that's something you really got to be careful of. So yeah, overall, I had a very mixed experience being an Eikaiwa teacher. However, I don't regret any part of that, because I met so many different kinds of people, and I think I learned just a lot about living in Japan, and I learned a lot about Japanese people just doing it, because I met so many different kinds of people and I could have so many different kinds of conversations. The thing I don't like about it is you don't get that many breaks. It's very long and it's very tiring, and a lot of the time you'll finish quite late, because most people take classes after work, so you'll start like 10 a.m. sometimes and finish like 7 p.m. or even, I remember a few times I finished at 9 p.m. and I'm kind of more of a morning person when it comes to work, so it just really didn't work for me. However, if you would prefer to work later, I think that really could work for you. Where I'm teaching now, I'm just teaching in like a regular school, and I have a lot less hours and a lot less classes, and honestly it's just a lot less pressure. When you're working in a school and when you're working in Eikaiwa, it's different, because in Eikaiwa technically they're your customers, so they'll tend to complain a lot more and they'll tend to expect a lot more, so that's also something that gives a lot of pressure. So I prefer to work in a school mostly because it's just like low pressure. So yeah, but like that's personally just me. Like I know people who have worked in Eikaiwa a long time and they just really like it, and they don't really like the school system that much, so like it's really up to you. I would suggest trying both and seeing how you feel. Let me know how you feel about Eikaiwas, if you would ever work in an Eikaiwa, if you have any story working in an Eikaiwa, I would honestly love to hear it. As always, thank you for watching and please subscribe.